Okay, so this I kind of touched on last question, but advice for after the interview or the career fair. I guess, Litsa, do you want to take this one first?
Sure. So we touched on it a little bit about following up. So whoever was part of the interview panel, I would recommend going to all the interview panel members. And in career fair, if there were multiple people from the same company, do address all of them. At the end of the day, you don't know if they actually work together or not. They may be from different departments and not even know each other. So please follow up with all of them. I would also, ask if you have any other questions, like follow-up questions after the career fair or interview. It's totally fine to ask. It actually shows that you thought about it afterwards. You processed all the information and you are still interested or even more interested about the role. So ask those questions. One of the questions I like to ask too is what can I do as a candidate if it's an interview to be more prepared for this role in the future? Can I do anything near term or even long term? Do you have any advice for me? And that's actually been really helpful for me in my career when I do ask that question.
Nice. Yeah, because you could get a sense too of what the interviewer is thinking. If they're like, well, I'd start from the drawing board versus like, no, just keep building on what you're doing or something. Like you'll get a sense of, what their initial thoughts are of you. So that's a great question to ask the interviewer. Okay. I'll go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to pass on to Tony as an HR person.
Yeah.
Do you have anything to add?
Sure. Yeah, I do. I think all great points. A couple of things as well, like tips and tricks that I like to think about. I love your point around, is there anything that I could do to be considered a stronger candidate in your eyes, right? You're kind of getting that, okay, well, here's where, I may see a gap or, so that's a good one. I think in the follow-up to how to stick out is going back to preparing for those questions. So, tying those questions or how you share your strengths back into that thank you note. So for instance, that follow-up of, thank you for your time to the interview panel, as we discussed, my background within the, quality sciences, my passion for the industry and my, lab experience position me well for this role. I look forward to starting my career with this organization. As mentioned, the recent acquisition of Viral Vector Services is really of interest to me, right? Like kind of pulling out what you've talked about, summarizing, and then also hitting on your strengths again, I think is a nice way to package that thank you note, as opposed to just, I want to thank you for the time. It was really informative, right? So like, again, because everyone should be sending that thank you follow-up, but how do you stick out? And I think weaving in some of those discussion points, bring a notepad and pen, right? As they're sharing things, even sharing with you that you find interesting and you want to highlight later, write that down so that you can then read that back to them. And what that tells me is, wow, that person was super engaged in the discussion. They were listening to like what I was actually, saying. And yeah, they called back out that strength that they have or that interest. And that's just going to better position you to get the role.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, taking the notes and showing that you're listening, it tells me that when I hire you, you're going to be that engaged. And so it shows what kind of an employee you are as well. So Litsa and Tony, what are your thoughts on, there's multiple ways of sending a thank you note. You could connect with the person on LinkedIn and then thank them in LinkedIn. You could send them an email, or you could send a written mailed, like in the actual mail, thank you letter. So what is, I mean, obviously if you go all the way to the written version, that would be wonderful, but what is the typical expectation? Is it still written, or what are your thoughts on that?
For us, I think it's email from, culturally Lumina, that's what we're seeing. A lot of email. A lot of people are not leveraging LinkedIn as much as I thought they would. I'm not seeing a lot of people either looking me up or, trying to find about my background, which I find interesting. It's a great tool that people don't leverage. What about you,
Yeah.
Tony?
Yeah, I mean, I would say the same. Emails the go-to now. A lot of us are remote, or like, within my team, you could be interviewing from someone from Italy, the US, and London all on one interview panel. So like that's going to get really complicated. Back when I used to work at Penn, I was very impressed with the mailed letters. Like, you just took the time. So I would say, if you're at a, interviewing at a site where it's an interview team and you know them and you can do that, go for it. Put them in the mail like the minute you leave the interview, though, because of timing wise. But really the standard is email in my industry. And if someone did it via LinkedIn, great. Like, I think that's great. It actually, in some ways is more advantageous, because then you're like in that inbox versus the 300 emails I get every day, which, that one's less crowded. So
Yeah, there's a question that's kind of relevant to this. And Myra, we have not forgotten about your question about networking. But Harish's question is, how much do you remember candidates that didn't get a role, or people who have tried to reach out to you about the role? Yeah, and what do you do to make that interaction memorable? So I think we touched a little bit about that, but do we remember people? And I do. I do, and I've reached out to people when a role opens up. Hey, I opened a role, and I know you were interested, or we spoke about it, or that person might have interviewed and did not get it. And I have reached out to people. I'm actually, I have recently done this, like 2 weeks ago, recently, just to get more people to apply for a role. So in my opinion, we do it. It happens all the time.
I second that. I mean, I know there's a couple people that were close seconds or even thirds, right? And it's just, we're we need to find the best candidate for those roles. And sometimes you may not be the best candidate for that role, but you've made an impression. And we are like, we need to bring this person into the organization somehow. And so, at the end of the day, that doesn't mean that you stop applying to other things and you keep pursuing opportunities. But yeah, you can absolutely make an impression by the things that Litsa and I just outlined, like how to make that memorable and how to stick out is important. If it's a company that like you really, really aspire to join, I would challenge you all to like put a 30-day, 60-day reminder on. So like you get the feedback that you didn't get the role. Okay, could I learn a little bit, maybe where I missed the mark or whatnot? Sometimes companies will give you that, that our recruiters will share that feedback with you. But if it's something like 60 days, 90 days, follow back up and say, hey, still very interested in a company. Keeping that connection and networking, it's work. Like networking is work. But if you do it, then you can see some outcomes from that.
Great. And I know we do have a question about the follow-up. So I'd like to explore that a little bit more with you. That's fantastic.